All right. Welcome. Hello. This is day 5 of the Rhythm Challenge to Rhythm Talent Workshops. It's been very exciting. It's been a great week. Days 1 through 4 were awesome. I think people hopefully got a ton out of it. And this day is about some advanced stuff. At the beginning of this, I shared a fantastic quote that I saw on Facebook of there's no such thing as advanced skills, just advanced situations that require strong fundamentals. And that's what today is about, is seeing some of those advanced situations, getting to put our fundamentals to the test. So if you haven't been following along with this and you haven't caught the first 4 days, I really encourage you to go back and get those because that's where we get to the fundamentals. But today we have some fun, advanced, tricky stuff to figure out and get some help counting and see how it again all ties back to those fundamentals. I do want to give the quick disclaimer up front that this might be a little bit challenging, a little bit tricky. If you're really struggling and this is like so confusing and blowing your mind, totally fine. Some of these rhythms are very difficult, and actually they're not very difficult. They're very rare. They're not super familiar. I also have a saying that only things that are unfamiliar are hard. Anything that's unfamiliar is tricky. But once you get familiar with it, then it's not so bad. But if these are sort of freaking you out and feel really unfamiliar, that's okay. Stick to days 1 through 4. There's a playlist on the Quick Start Clarinet YouTube channel for Rhythm Challenge to Rhythm Talent. So you can check that out and sort of work through those first 4 days to really get prepared for this. But if you are more advanced or want to test your fundamentals, then you're in the right spot today. So let's go ahead and get into it. And I want to start by recapping what the fundamentals of rhythm are. So we need to know sort of how the counting is and how the note values work. Most of us are pretty good at that. But more importantly, we need to have a good steady beat, and we need to know how to connect those rhythms and the counting to the steady beat. So all you ever have to do to have true rhythm, really good rhythm, is just make sure that you know how the rhythms fit into the steady beat and you're able to always lead to the next predictable steady beat. That's the biggest secret I can give you for enjoying working with the metronome and having confidence working with the metronome, is always be leading forward to the next steady beat. And I'll be showing quite a bit of that as we get into this. So let me do that. Let me just double check. Looks like my screen is sharing. Perfect. The technology is working on YouTube at least. Sorry, TikTok. If you want to watch on YouTube, that's great. So up on the screen now, we have some very advanced, or again, they're not that advanced, but these are the advanced situations. This is about as advanced as it gets. And I want to show how to break these down and how to see how they work in the context of the rhythm stuff we're doing. Actually, real quick, let me jump back to the full screen so I can show some stuff about how this works. So far, what we've been doing with the first 4 days is we have our predictable steady beat in 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've been fitting in different rhythms. That's what day 3, the subdivision exercise, was all about, was being able to do those different subdivisions leading to the beat, looking forward, aiming with the metronome, being steady, combining the counting and the steady beat. Now what we're going to do is see some situations where we might need to actually shift the steady beat a little bit to make the counting easier. So a perfect example of that are triplets. In these triplets, there's all kinds of crazy stuff, especially with quarter note triplets, where they don't fit in the beat. The reason why we need to have the 3 over a triplet is because they don't exactly fit how we would normally fit notes into the beat. So with the quarter note triplet, for example, it creates a kind of cool, actually, I'm a huge fan of quarter note triplets. I love when there's quarter note triplets in a piece that I'm playing or a piece that I'm listening to. And they create this cool 3 against 2 hemiola effect, which again, 3 against 2 hemiola polyrhythm. Wow, that sounds super crazy and super complex. And it can be if you're really trying to feel that. That would be something like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So my voice is doing 3, but my snapping's doing 2, so that's that 3 against 2. All a hemiola is when there's sort of one subdivision against another subdivision. That's nothing too fancy, even though this word sounds really cool and fancy. But what we can do instead, especially depending on the tempo, is shift the beat. So instead of D, 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 where we have the 3 against 2, we can just make it 3 against 1. D, 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 D. And think about those 2 beats grouped together in one. So instead of having, we have our 2 beats and leading to the 3rd beat always, and we're trying to fit 3 beats in here, and it creates this kind of friction in the gears where there's 2 fingers here and they're not lining up. Like if it was perfectly lined up, then it'd be really easy and nice, and that's just quarter notes. But the quarter note triplet shifts things over and it doesn't want to connect really well. But if we just take this beat out, then it does connect, and we have 3 in the 1, which we have practiced doing in the subdivision exercise. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. That's 3 in 1, and it works exactly the same, but you have to like sort of take this spoke of the gear out. I don't know if gears have spokes, but you have to take that out so it feels like 3 against 1. So we would be shifting the steady beat in this example. It'd be 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So instead of having what we're used to having of beat, 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 da, beat, da, we would have no beat here. And you can see now that fits very easily. So that's kind of the theme for today. I want to go through several others that have kind of a similar effect to that, just so you can see how to work through this. So looking at the second measure here, this is like, oh my gosh, crazy sauce. I don't know how to make these rhythms work. And if you're thinking about note values, it's going to be really, really challenging to make these rhythms work. This is like a dotted 8th triplet, 16th triplet, 8th triplet, 2 16th triplets, 8th triplet, 8th triplet, like really hard to comprehend how long a 16th note of a triplet is, or a dotted 8th triplet. Those are really, really complicated note values to be comprehending. Oh, I forgot to pull up my screen. There it is. So here you can see where the actual rhythm and how the beat and how we're taking that out. So with the triplets, again, it's impossible to know how long a dotted 8th triplet or a 16th note triplet is. But what we can do instead is, again, shift our gears. So instead of how it's written is we have 1 beat of space here, and then there's like, I don't know, a dotted and then a 16th and then an 8th. Like, I don't even know how to contort my fingers to make that work. So what we can do instead is shift the beat from quarter note beats that we have going to triplet beats. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And now this fits pretty normally. So this is our 1, 2, 3 of the triplet. We have the dotted one, then the 16th triplet happens in between, and then the 3rd one lines up. And now that's something I can contort my fingers to do so that I'm clear about how it's connecting, how the beat and how the actual rhythms and counts are fitting together. So it goes from something abstract of like bum da bum ba ba da ba da, where I'm not really sure how it lines up, to beam ba bum ba ba bum bum bum. This becomes actually very similar to what might be a 3/4 rhythm of something like this. And this rhythm, that's a bar line, if that's confusing. This rhythm is a lot more familiar, I think. 1 and 3, 1 and 2, 3, 1. That's an easy rhythm. That's something that feels familiar and feels natural. And that's the goal. Whenever you encounter something that's really crazy, see if you can shift around the steady beat a bit to make it something a little less crazy. So let's give that a try with this next line. So there's some crazy 30-second note action going on here. Again, this is starting on beat 2 is theoretically, beat 3. Theoretically, 8 notes in the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, and then, oh my gosh, what's happening? 16th, 2 30 seconds, dotted 16th, 30 second. Like, again, how the heck long is a dotted 16th note? I have no idea how long a dotted 16th note is, but If we add shift the beat a little bit, find another gear to fit it into, it makes a lot more sense. For 30-second notes, the eighth note gears work really well. So if we add that extra structure, we have something more to aim for. Da ba ba ba, just 4. Da ba ba ba, those are arrows. Dum, bum bum bum, bum bum. And we're always going forward to the next beat. So we always need to find that next beat. Again, I could do the same idea as we can sort of put this as a 2/4 rhythm. These 30-second notes look crazy, super unfamiliar, but as a 2/4 rhythm, it just becomes 16ths. I'm gonna write this really fast, so it's gonna be really sloppy, but it'll work to get the idea. So we just have 16ths, and then eighth and 2/16, very familiar. Dotted eighth, 16th. And again, maybe these aren't very familiar rhythms to you, but they're certainly a whole lot more familiar than a dotted 16th. A dotted eighth, 16th is way easier than a dotted 16th, 32nd, even though they have the same feel if you shift that steady beat and make it an eighth note steady beat. Another way to think about this, if you're very familiar with cut time, the way cut time works is you take quarter notes, but then they end up being counted as eighth notes, so you're adding a beam. The way this is working is you could take something with a lot of beams, like 30-second notes, and when you shift to an eighth note beat, then you take away one of those beams. That was a lot more beams than I meant to take away, but you get the idea of how that's sort of related. So again, those 30-second notes look crazy, definitely unfamiliar, but that 2/4 rhythm's pretty familiar. And as long as we are aiming for the right beats, in this case we need to be aiming for eighth note beats, then it's not so bad at all. I want to look at a few more examples of this sort of advanced stuff. Sometimes the music actually requires us to shift around the beat. And this is what happens when we change time signatures. So I have a few different time signatures lined up here, 4/4, 6/8, 2/4, 7/8. And at first it might be really intimidating trying to shift between those because the beat actually shifts. There's not a steady beat. It's still a predictable beat, which is important, but it's not steady. It's bum, bum, beam, beam, bum, bum, beam, beam, bum, 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 bum. That's what the beat would be for this. Quick side note, that assumes that it's eighth note equals eighth note, which is usually what happens when we're shifting time signatures. Usually composers will be nice and put a little note that looks something like this: eighth equals eighth, or quarter equals dotted quarter. If it's quarter equals dotted quarter, the beat doesn't change at all. So I'm not super interested in that right now. That's really straightforward. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's all it would be. But we're assuming eighth equals eighth, which is the more common version here. So that sort of gives away how we need to be thinking about this to make the transition easy. It can be kind of hard to go from quarter note beat to dotted quarter note beat. But if we were to think in eighth notes, then it suddenly becomes a lot more simple because the eighth note equals the eighth note. So you can do 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. And then the beat sort of solves itself. And in fact, when I was first counting through it to demonstrate how the shifting of the time signatures works, that's what I was thinking in my head. Beat, 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 beat. So whenever you're shifting time signatures, first of all, you need to understand if it's eighth note equals eighth note or quarters equals dotted quarters. You need to know what the common denominator there is, and then think in the common denominator. Then it's easy to shift, especially if you know you're counting from day one and have studied your rhythm trees. For example, maybe 7/8 is something that you're not familiar with. Well, if you go to quickstartclarinet.com/getstarted and download the rhythm tree appendix, then it has 7/8 in there, and you can figure out the counting and figure out how those common denominators fit in. So I have a few more examples to go over, a few more tricks, grace notes, ties, fun stuff like that. So the first thing are grace notes. The thing about grace notes is they almost always, and especially in contemporary music, they don't actually affect the rhythm at all. And that's kind of the trick with grace notes, is we don't want to let them affect the rhythm. In older music, like Mozart and basically Mozart or earlier, they can change the rhythm. So you need to think about your sort of Baroque or classical performance practice in those cases. But I think most of us play more contemporary music. So most of the time, they don't affect the rhythm. It just happens very quickly before the beat, and then you get to the beat. So the beat is still this downbeat. We're still aiming for that click. Ba-dum, yum, yum. That's how it works. Another quick tip, not super rhythm related, but a quick tip for grace notes is never let the grace note sound like the most important note. Don't want ba, ba. We want bia, bia. It's the note that the grace note's leading to that's the most important. So there's that. We've talked a little bit about this kind of situation where we have the and of 2, where there's technically a beat on 2 and then the beat on 3. And the solution here is to lead to beat 3, just like we were looking at in the rose example on day 4. And then, but now we have a tie. So we have to figure out how the tie is working. This one's a little tricky because in the rose example, without the tie there, it was very easy to and 3, and 3, and hit both of those notes. This one just has and. So the trick here is you still need to be feeling beat 3 really strongly. You still want to be leading forward to beat 3, but you're just going to sustain rather than re-articulating. So this first, most of this measure would be yum, so I'm still feeling and 3, yum, and 3, but I'm just sustaining through it. Yum, and that's how it works. Now, the other problem with ties is actually how long it is. And if you're using the old system of thinking in note values and thinking in counting, then you're going to have a really big problem here at the tie, because now it's an eighth note tied to a dotted quarter, and it's like, how long is that? Okay, a dotted quarter is 3/8 notes. The eighth note's 1/8 note, so that's 4/8 notes. That's the same as 2 quarter notes or a half note. But if you think half note here, it's not going to work. You cannot think of a eighth note tied to beat 3 dotted quarter as being a half note, because starting a half note on the and of 2 is very abstract and very tricky. And knowing when it ends is going to be also really tricky. So instead of worrying about how long the tied note is, I'm just going to look at when I play the next thing. The next thing is after beat 4, and it's and a leading to 1. And again, luckily, I'm quite good at this because I've been doing the subdivision exercise of 3E and a 4E and a 1. 4E and a 1. There it is. So I don't need to know how long the tied note is. I don't need to overcomplicate how these 16th notes work. It's just 4 and a 1. 4 and a 1. So this whole measure, a 1 and a 1. Pretty straightforward. Not nearly as bad as it might look. We have similar stuff happening in the next measure. There is a small chance that you might make a counter argument that you can actually keep track of this half note starting on the and of 2, and you could do 1, 2, and 2, da-da-bum, and sort of really be shifting the beat around like that. And maybe it's doable there, but I think it's much less doable on this next measure, where you have an eighth note tied to a quarter note, tied to a 16th note. How long is that? It's quarter note's 1 beat, eighth note's half a beat, 16th note's a quarter of a beat, so that's 1 3/4 of a beat. Good luck trying to keep track of how long 1 3/4 of a beat is. Instead, know where your beat is. Know where your rhythms are. We have a beat there. We have the and of 2 leading to beat 3. We have a beat on 4. And then we have eanda leading to 1. So that's all we need to be thinking about, is where are the beats? Connect the rhythm to the beats. Even though this is kind of a tricky or an advanced situation of this particular tied note, the fundamentals still apply of leading the notes to the beat. 1 and 3, 4, E and a 1. That's how it works. And I can say that where I think that in my head more and just say where I play. And that's sort of the ultimate way that it's going to feel like when you're playing is you'll be maybe tapping your foot or have the metronome going, and that'll be giving you bum, bum, pa, 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 bum. But in my head, I'm thinking 1 and 3, 4, E and a 1. And that's how we deal with tricky rhythms like this. Now, the last thing that you might notice is this rest. Oh, not the eraser. This rest happening on the beat here. I was saying E and a 1 leading to 1, but in this case, 1 is silence, but beat 1 is still there. Whether it's sound or whether it's silence, it's still there. So I can be thinking 1 and E and a. I still feel 1. I still know that beat 1 is there. It's just silence. E and a. Similarly to how we don't actually like tongue or say anything here on beat 4, but we still feel it. That beat's still there, even though we're sustaining into it. Bum, bum, beep, ba, ba, bum, or beep, ba, ba. All the beats are still there. So whether you're sustaining into it, whether it's silence, you're still feeling the beat and still leading every rhythm to the next beat. I didn't include an example of this, but this is also true when you have a lot of syncopations going and 1. It can be really tempting to sort of like react to the beat and, but that's a very stressful and anxious way to do syncopations. It's much better to be leading forward to the next beat. And it's just silence. And 1. And eventually every syncopation will resolve to a downbeat eventually. Unless you're a horn player, you probably will never ever play a piece where it's only upbeats. So you can always be eventually aiming forward to that resolution of the syncopation. Bum, 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 bum. Sorry, my snapping wasn't super steady there, but I think you get the idea of how that works. So that's a whole list of advanced situations, some complicated things that you might run into. Again, if this was very confusing, that's totally fine. This is sort of like a test of the fundamentals. There's not too much here to learn other than the idea of you can shift the gear of the steady beat to make the rhythms fit in more easily. If you're trying to fit the triangle rhythms into the square steady beat, it might not work. It might be easier to switch to a triangle steady beat. That's just going with the gear analogy. That would be like shifting to an eighth note or a triplet steady beat, so it's easier to lock it in. But that's like the only big takeaway for today. Otherwise, we were just doing exactly the same fundamentals we've been doing before. Figuring out how the counting, how the rhythms relate to the steady beat, doing what we were doing in the subdivision exercise, and 2 and 3 for E and a 1. It's just the subdivision exercise, but we're changing where we're shifting the subdivisions and when we're shifting the subdivisions. So that's all the fundamentals. If you can just practice that subdivision exercise every day, you're going to be in good shape to really know how everything subdivides and works together, as long as you're also taking that one next step to see how the rhythms in the music relate to the steady beat, whether it's a shifted steady beat or not. Now, your homework for today, because we do still have one day left and still one day of homework, but this homework's really easy and kind of fun, and it's just to take the rhythm knowledge that you've learned and apply it to your music. Whatever piece of music you're looking at, whenever you're practicing again, look at the rhythms, find where the beats are, see how the rhythms and the note values and the counting connect into that steady beat and lead forward to every steady beat so that you can feel like you're really in control of rhythm, because that's the secret. There's no advanced, super cool tool or anything fancy. It's just do the subdivision exercise, know how the notes connect to the steady beat. Even in the most advanced situations, that's all it is. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you join tomorrow. We're going to be celebrating day 6 of you making it through the 5 days of the challenge and hopefully learning a lot about rhythm. Again, it's simple stuff, but actually knowing this is going to make a world of difference doing this subdivision exercise will make a world of difference. The other thing that I'm going to be doing tomorrow for anybody who's interested in it is I'm going to be talking more in depth about True Rhythm Mastery, which is my course that sort of inspired this challenge. This is my newest course that I just came out with, and the whole idea behind it is to get this connection between the steady beat and the rhythm so that people feel great about playing with the metronome when you're done with it. You feel like you've really mastered rhythm. Being confident with rhythm and patterns is very, very helpful for sight reading. So that's also a benefit of it. If you want to get more of this kind of stuff, go to quickstartclarinet.com/rhythm to check out that course. And of course, join me tomorrow for day 6, where we'll be talking about it quite a bit more in depth and celebrating your success making it through this week, doing the homework. I hope there's some of you out there watching who've really been following along and doing the homework. That's fantastic. So that's it for today. There are a few questions in the chat, which is fantastic. Sovereign142 says, this might be a bit advanced. Yeah, go to the Quick Start Clarinet YouTube channel, and there's a playlist called Rhythm Challenge to Rhythm Talent. You'll be able to find the previous days there. Also, it's actually in the description of this video too. So if you just open the description below, you'll be able to find that. Susan says, what's the best way to count 16th note triplets? That's a good one. So this is an example of where we're shifting the steady beat. So we're going to make the steady beat 8th notes. So 16th note triplets would be 1 triplet and triplet 2. So we have 3 triplets on 1, 3 triplets on and then we land at 2. 1 triplet and triplet 2, 1 triplet and triplet 2, and then 2 triplet and triplet 3. Or if you have like an 8th note and then 3 16th note triplets, 1 and triplet 2. So that's how that works. Gwenda said this method of counting has really helped me progress in my band playing. Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome, Gwenda. I'm glad that this has been helpful for you. I'm glad that it's working. So yeah, fantastic. And even if you're watching a replay of this, feel free to comment with questions and I'll always be happy to answer those. So that's it for day 5. I hope you'll join tomorrow for day 6 for celebration and to learn more about True Rhythm Mastery. There's also, I'm going to do a little recap. So to really put a bow on everything, bring it all together. And I haven't decided if it's going to make sense or fit in, but I also might be sharing what I call the True Rhythm Mastery System, which is a 5-step system that I teach in the course. I think I probably will end up sharing that because I think it will be helpful. It might, I'm just not sure if it'll make sense without the context of the course, but I think that with this workshops of the past 5 days, I think it'll work. So I'll probably be sharing that tomorrow too. So come join and we'll have a good time tomorrow finishing up the Rhythm Challenge to Rhythm Talent workshops. And I hope you all are feeling that you might have a little more talent when it comes to rhythm than you thought. So I'll sign off and see you all tomorrow, hopefully. Bye.